Hey guys, welcome back to part two of my story, essentially. How I came to be in this position, what exactly happened that brought me into this kind of depression, and kind of where I'm at right now. I think last time I had told you that essentially early October I had what I would call the beginning of my breakdown. I woke up one night, I want to say October 2nd, October 3rd of 2015. I felt extremely suicidal. And so I started to tell people about the feelings that I was having, particularly the fact that I felt that it would be best for me to be gone at that point. I started to feel like a burden on my family for whatever reason. I started to imagine that I would feel like this forever. I think it really began to dawn on me how bad things had gotten at that point, that something had built up and that something bad was coming. Now the first week of October or so, I felt very sluggish, kind of foggy, what I would describe as sort of the feeling of like the most severe depression I had up to that point. I don't know if you want to call it a 1 to 10 scale, 10 being the very worst. I was probably at a 4 or 5 at that point. And though I'd been probably around that in the past, I felt like this was particularly debilitating physically, mentally, emotionally. I felt very much numb. I thought to myself that suicide began to sound like a very real option, began to sound like almost a logical option to escape the way I felt. I mean, I felt terrible. Physically, I was in a lot of strange pain. I started to have some of the effects of really strong anxiety at the same time, with like body feelings. Even in my gums, I could feel anxiety, if that makes sense to some of you out there. But definitely in my jaw, in my face, in my neck, in my shoulders, my back. And of course, around that time, I stopped getting out of bed. I was in bed probably 20 hours a day, at least. I would get up sometimes and look at the computer. I would get up and eat a bowl of cereal, and then I would go right back to bed. I was showering maybe once a week, if that. Obviously, I smelled bad. I felt bad. I looked bad. I probably still do look bad. Don't get me wrong, but essentially, I'd let my physical self just go at that point, and this is early October. Now, over the next 2 to 3 weeks, things continued to build in a very bad way. I was still in bed, obviously, 20 plus hours a day, but the time that I began to be awake, I began to research suicide very strongly. I began to look up ways to kill myself. I began to look at examples of people who had killed themselves. I began to really think about what it would be like for other people if I killed myself. And of course, you're kind of drawn to that idea that people would be better off, or that people would understand because you were in such pain. I began to kind of rationalize with myself and kind of bargain with myself into finding a way to commit suicide. There were times, really the first plan I had was to drive to Colorado and jump off a cliff. It's a cliff that I know well and that I have in my mind, that I thought this sounds like a logical, reasonable idea. I even booked some lodging out there with the intention of going out and and doing it. Now, during that time, I was having the kind of days that I would be planning this, and then to actually follow through with those actions took so much energy and so much emotional focus and so much mental clarity or ability that I wouldn't even be able to follow through. I would be back in bed the day that I was supposed to drive out to Colorado, and thinking to myself, wow, I can't even kill myself. I don't even have the physical, mental capacity, ability to do that. And so then, of course, throughout October, I began to kind of ruminate on other ways that I could do that. Now, during this, I was discussing, I started to discuss these things with friends, and honestly started to scare my friends. I had 2 or 3 friends in particular who I was able to speak with on the phone and through text message, on Facebook about these things, and I started to realize that I was very much scaring these people, that they obviously, being sane, rational people, were taking what I was saying seriously, and they should have, and that I was essentially telling multiple people that I was going to take my own life, and why, and how, and when, and those kind of things. Now, they were concerned, obviously, and they ended up contacting my sister, who lives here in town, and is kind of a confidant for me and somebody I can trust, and let her know what was going on. Of course, she was very concerned, and it all sort of started to build up in terms of, hey, Andy's in real trouble. Clearly, he's having extreme issues, problems. He's talking a lot about suicide, and I started to worry my friends and family, essentially, and for good reason. The things that I was saying, the thoughts I was having, the way I was behaving, it all sounded and looked like it could be any time, and it felt like to me it could be any time that I went ahead and committed suicide. Now, near the end of October, I kind of stopped talking to people about it, because in my mind, if I kept talking to people about it, if I kept explaining it or giving away the ideas that I had to do it, then I wouldn't be able to, that someone would stop me, that I might end up in a mental institution, those kind of things. And so my thinking was very warped. My thinking was very backwards at that time. It was, don't tell anybody about this, because then you won't be able to actually follow through with it, because you'll be stopped, because people will naturally be concerned, call the police maybe, whatever it is. And that actually did happen at one point. My dad had to call the police because I was talking continually about suicide, and they came out, and I, for lack of a better term, I essentially lied to them and told them that I had no intention to hurt myself or someone else, knowing kind of how things work, and that if I told them how I actually felt, then I would be involuntarily committed to a hospital, which I probably should have been at that time, just to be quite honest. And this is late October. So by early November, I have every intention of taking my own life. At this time, I begin to believe that the best way for me to do that is to use a firearm. And so I go to Walmart. I buy a shotgun. I buy shotgun shells, hollow point slugs, essentially. And I spend a few days over the course of a couple weeks in the bathroom with a shotgun in my mouth at times, trying to work up the nerve, the courage, the ability to go ahead and use it. Now that that takes a lot for me to say on video right now, even 2 months later, 2.5 months later, because while that was happening, and while I felt like I finally had the tools to take my own life if I wanted to, the self-survival instinct kind of kicks in, and at the same time you're kind of battling survival on one hand and the feeling that you need to commit suicide on the other. And in the middle is you being ripped apart. Probably some of the most horrific days of my life. Just destroyed with mental illness, destroyed with depression, destroyed with feelings of worthlessness, feelings of absolutely no hope. None. I really truly believed that if I could work up the courage to do this, I would be better off and I would be able to end my own life and be done with it. Unfortunately, or fortunately, I could not do that. Whether it be for the fear of someone finding that and the terrible aftermath of that, whether it be the fear that I would somehow survive or injure myself in a way that was even worse than the mental illness I was experiencing, I'm not sure. But that was early November. After that point, I attempted to hang myself with a belt. And I think at that point it was desperation. It was, I can't use a gun against myself, so I need to find a way to take care of this problem in some way. The most painless way I can think. A way that seemed like it wouldn't leave, not to be morbid, a mess. And so I did that. And so by the middle of November, I'd bought a shotgun. I'd made plans to kill myself. I'd written suicide notes that were quite disturbing. And I tried to hang myself. At this point, this was the lowest point in my life. Though I'm not particularly in a great place right now, and I still have terrible days, and I still have days of strong depression. This time between the middle of October and the middle of November was truly the worst time of my life. Obsessing over suicide, unable to live even remotely in the moment or normally or happily or even in a fraction of time where I can relax and I can see outside of this. None of that was available at this time. I was completely eaten up with mental health issues, completely eaten up with depression, completely eaten up with anxiety. I had essentially lost my mind, and I believed that suicide was an excellent option at this point. And so it was extremely difficult. And that was up to about mid-November. And that's the second part of my story, probably the worst part of my story. And I apologize to you out there who may have been triggered by what I'm relaying to you, what I'm saying to you, or if you're shocked that things got that bad, I apologize. And I make these videos, and I'm trying to make these videos in order to both see that I've come a certain amount away from that worst period, but also to let you out there know, I know there are those out there who are feeling that, and I want you to know you're not alone. I want you to know that you're worth fighting for, and that your life is valuable, your life is meaningful, that things do pass, even as terrible as they get, they do pass. Today I no longer feel the need to plan my suicide or obsess over suicide, but it comes in my mind sometimes. But I feel like I have an escape now, and that is some level of happiness, some level of patience with my mental health problems, some level of optimism that eventually things can get better. and that there will be better days ahead. So that's part 2 of my story. This video got a little bit long, and I apologize for that. I realize not everyone's going to watch 15 minutes of me rambling, and that's okay. But that's what I had to say today. And we'll pick it up next time. We'll talk about what's happened from mid-November to about mid-January, and we'll go from there. And I wish everybody out there the best, and I hope your 2016 is off to a great start. And I'll talk to you soon.